Welcome to Summit University. Today our guest is Steven Acuff. He's a best-selling author and lecturer on health and diet in Europe and the United States. Mr. Acuff specializes in the macrobiotic diet. He is an instructor at the Cushy Institutes in Massachusetts and a nutritional counselor at a medical clinic in Germany. He is also director of a macrobiotic center in Sweden. Mr. Acuff is here today to talk about Oriental Diagnosis.
This time we're taking up the subject of eye evaluation. The eyes, as I said before, are in general a barometer of our nervous system. In the East, the eyes are sometimes called the mirror of the soul. So when there is unrest or anxiety, this will show in eye dis-ease. Some people have difficulty looking at the person they're talking to. If you're talking to them, you'll see they'll look at the ceiling while they're talking to you, they'll look at the floor or the walls, but they have difficulty focusing their eyes on the person they're talking to. This is an inner unease. So even though the body may show no signs of anxiety, the eyes most often will do this. And we know expressions like, your eyes never lie. You can say one thing, but your eyes will immediately betray the lie. When we use the eyes for our diagnostic purposes, we can see that many people have a veil. It's like an invisible veil over the eyes, but it gives the eyes a certain dullness. They look a little dull. There's a lack of sparkle, of spark, of that life energy. And we can see on people who are in ill health that often the eyes will seem to have almost like a glazed over look. As health recovers, the eyes usually become clearer, and a little bit of that sparkle comes. I mentioned before that a week or two is all it takes to start bringing on those changes. So, our first eye diagnosis is a general impression. You know, just how does the person look? Just for this eye clearness or dullness. And then we go on more to the details of the eyes. Now, the area immediately around the eyes is also interesting to us. We've already discussed the importance of the skin quality around the eyes, that it's not puffy, that it's not dark, that it's not reddish, or we could say unclear. Sometimes people get little hard white formations around the eye. It's in the skin around the eye, in the eyelid. Very little hard, almost like a granule. And this is showing fat excess, especially being gathered in the kidneys. So optimally, the color of the skin around the eyes is the same as the rest of the face. And for constitutional diagnosis, if the eyes are very symmetrical on the face, this is a sign of constitutional strength. It shows that the energies of mother and father have merged in a very harmonious way. Whereas sometimes one eye will be slightly higher than the other, or it will be quite different. This is showing that mother and father's influences haven't merged so harmoniously. You for sure have seen pictures where you take half a face and then make a mirror image of that half and put it on the other side. It looks like two different people when you compare the mirror of the right and mirror of the left. So you can well imagine the differences, and some people are radically different. Everybody is some different. No one is exactly symmetrical. We're not perfect, but the more symmetry, the better. And especially the eyes are what show that symmetry. The eyelashes. The eyelashes should be let's say firm, full, and the longer they are, the more yin. So it's interesting that we think of female beauty as having longer eyelashes, and some women even paste long eyelashes on so they look more feminine, more yin. And long eyelashes are indeed a sign of more yin in the basic constitution. These are not things that change so much, but rather it's more determined when you're born, the way your eyelashes will be. Then we can look at the eye itself. Now, medical doctors are aware of the eyes as a sign of diagnosis if they turn yellow. They know this usually shows there's some liver trouble. And we can do the same. We see eyes that have yellow as a general color, sign of liver trouble. But when we look a little closer at the eye, we may see that the yellow is not uniform, but rather splotchy. And then it becomes more interesting for us in our diagnosis, because we have the possibility then of zooming in on more specific areas. So let's take a look at the eye. Say we'll divide it up into 4 basic parts. Now here we're talking about the white part of the eye. You also can learn iris diagnosis, iridology, which was developed to an art by Dr. Bernard Jensen. Iridology is a science in itself, and if you can develop that, it's great. But the differences are sometimes a millimeter between one organ and the other. You can very easily guess the wrong thing because it's so specific, and you need a magnifying glass to do iridology. So the kind of eye diagnosis that we use in our macrobiotic health evaluation is not normally iris diagnosis, but it certainly fits well with iris diagnosis if you know that, iridology. So we're looking at the sclera, the white part of the eye. And these 4 zones are like this. This part corresponds to the lowest part of the body. That means abdomen, kidneys, reproductive organs. The middle part corresponds to the middle part of our body, to liver, pancreas, spleen, lungs also. The upper part corresponds more to the upper part of the body. So our head and sinus area. So this is a more general kind of diagnosis. It's not a diagnosis technique which is as specific as iridology. So it's best to use the eye diagnosis in relation to other things, face, feet, hands. So we use it as part of our greater concept here. And the more information we gather, the more confident we can be that what we're saying is really what's happening and it's not some wild imagination that we're just coming up with. Because it's very difficult to check these things. If someone comes to you and says, well, this shows in your eye, this means you have this, there's no real way you can know if that's true or not. But if someone is checking many things and getting a good overall view, then we can be more certain that the evaluation is valid. So let's take a look at some of the things that we might see on the eye. First of all, if we come back to our subject of yellowness, aside from uniform yellow, which of course is liver, we can sometimes see yellowish deposits at the bottom of the eye. You see this often when you just pull away the eyelid with your thumb. Look at the bottom part of the eye. This corresponds to our reproductive organs, and yellowish accumulations in the bottom part show excess fat in uterus, ovaries in women, prostate in men. Heavy fats are in fact the major cause of prostate cancer, one of the most common cancers. Did you know that over about 50% of all men over 70 years old in the US have prostate cancer? It's a very slow-growing cancer, so it's not as often the cause of death as it is a disease which strikes men. But it's in fact true. Isn't it interesting that Japan has 10 times less prostate cancer than the US? Interesting. What's the difference? It's certainly not genetic, because when Japanese men move to San Francisco, they get as much prostate cancer as Americans do. It's fat, heavy animal fat. It's eggs and cheese and bacon and these kind of heavy things starting the day off. Breakfast, which should have a certain lightness to it to go into the day, is very heavy. Heavy, protein-rich and oily foods. This will show up here. We'll see it as fat gatherings. So excessive fats and oils, especially from animal foods, show as a yellow color here. Or sometimes you'll see blotches gather beside the iris. This can be either very clearly defined. It usually has a color, yellowish white. Almost looks as if a piece of cheese got stuck on your eye. Or it can be more diffuse. It looks more like a kind of gelatin gathering on the eye. So it can either be well-defined or more diffuse. In either case, it's showing tendency to a lot of fat gathering, and when it becomes very clearly defined like this, tendency to cysts and tumors. If we consider this to be the nose, we could say the side that's closest to the nose is more yang. The side that's more to the outside is more yin. Following our standard explanation, macrobiotic yin, macrobiotic yang. The yang is the contractive force, so it's only logical that the side closest to the nose would show us more the yang contractive disturbances. The outside force, more expansive or yin, this will show us more the yin. So, we can then very easily confirm this, and it's always interesting for me, even after many years and many people, to look at the eyes of people who have tumor illnesses and see how many people with tumors you'll see these blotches forming on the eyes. The good thing about this is that these things form long before the tumor is discovered. Do you know how long a cancerous tumor on an average, has been growing before it's discovered by medical techniques like mammographs? 10 years. The average tumor growth is 10 years before it's discovered. You can go, 2 times a year, 6 times a year, as many times a year as you want to get the breast x-rayed, and all they'll do is give you the bad news when it's there. It's not a preventive measure. It's very overestimated in what it can do. But much more clever than having the breast x-rayed regularly, there is no tissue in the body that is as sensitive to the radiation of x-rays as female breast tissue. Much more clever would be to look at the eyes and see if these kind of things are forming. Because in about 90% of women who get breast cancer, this is very clear. 90 to 95%. Not 100%, but the majority. So, because breast cancer is what we call a more yin disease, it's something that's forming more towards the outside, we'll sometimes see the formation on the yin side. But sometimes it forms on this side because breast cancer is a disease that involves also the liver. And this is actually the liver area on the eye. This is the right eye here. So, yet sometimes a woman with breast cancer will only show this. Or sometimes she'll have both, or sometimes she'll have more just on the outside. Now, before it gets this far, you'll sometimes see it more as just a shadow gathering. It's like a bluish gray shadow on the eye. And you have to look a little closer to see that one. These you can't miss. The camera can really pick those up. But this other, you have to look really close to see it. It's more a diffuse situation. It's not so drastic. But gradually, as years go by, this will become a real clear spot on the eye. Now, it's normal to have some blood vessels showing on the eye, capillaries. If we've got 5 or 6 of them, we'd say this is about average. So you look at the eye and you count the number of capillaries you can see. Some people have got so many you can't count them. The whole eye is full, and it may even look a little reddish because of all the expanded capillaries. It's expanded, so it has to be yin. So, reddish eyes, sign of extreme yin. Can also show that the nervous system is not sharp, because the nervous system, if we remember from the previous session, has to have a certain yang quality. That's the nature of the nervous system, is yang. And to be able to perceive vibrational energy, we need to have that strong yang. If the eyes are reddish, there's strong yin. This will show that the nervous system tends to be less yang and may even be markedly yin. Now, we distinguish between temporary situations and more chronic situations. We may drive into a big city and get behind a bus and find that we're breathing in a lot of ugly, dark fumes, and this is irritating our eyes because some of these pollutants are in fact very irritating. So if we get red eyes occasionally because of some reaction, this is not so much a sign of deeper problems as it is if we see that the person tends to have that. Can be out in the country, far from pollution, and still shows this. We see this on people that indulge in extreme yin, like alcohol and drugs. The extreme yin of alcohol and drugs also expands the pupil. So as the pupil expands, because the pupil actually is kept contracted by a yang force. And some people don't have the ability to contract the pupil because they're taking too much strong yin, which is negatively affecting their nervous system. So, because of these very strong things, their pupil will always be too relaxed. It is lacking that yang force to make it tight. So if your pupil is too relaxed, this means you're letting in too much light. So you don't feel comfortable just walking around absorbing daylight because your pupils are too big. So you wear sunglasses. If you wear sunglasses, this will slow down everything. It'll make you feel more comfortable. So when I think of somebody from the drug scene, I have an easy time imagining somebody with dark glasses. But also, we think of where do people like to drink beer, like a tavern? Do they have it brightly lit like this stage? You know? Do you enjoy drinking beer, you know, and whiskey and things? No, of course not. They have the subdued lighting, because as you consume alcohol, your pupils will expand, and you don't feel comfortable in bright lighting. You like it darker. So it's good for business to have it dark. People feel good. They'll sit there and continue drinking. So if we've got a few of these, that's okay. But if it's a lot, then we should think about what we're doing wrong. How can we make the nervous system yang again? And I've mentioned this before. You're all aware of it now. Seaweeds, or sea vegetables as we call them, high in minerals, are a quick way of making the nervous system more yang, more contracted. Using seaweed condiments, where we roast kombu, or where we roast kombu or wakame, are two that are our favorites for powder. We can sprinkle these on our food and get extra minerals from those. It's a good way of dealing with extreme yin in the nervous system. If we've taken a lot of medications, we may have expanded red capillaries in our eyes. So this can also be an occasion where we will go a little heavier on the sea vegetables. If we have underactive thyroids, this is also an occasion for taking these sea vegetable condiments. Because it's fine to eat seaweeds as side dishes and as ingredients in soups, etc. But sometimes in these special situations we need a little higher dose, especially over a certain period of time. So, when we look at the eye, we'll sometimes see very pronounced, extreme, not only expanded, but it seems to be really dominating the eye when we look at it. Very enlarged capillaries. And sometimes we'll see a dot on the end of them. This is, in this area, shows a sign of kidney problems. We may be developing some tendency to kidney stones, which sometimes doesn't develop totally into a stone. We can have small particles which gather, like just precipitate out of the urine and gather more like sand in the kidneys, and doesn't form to a total stone, but it will still show as this sand is gathering in the kidneys, whether it becomes a full stone or not. About 12% of all men get real kidney stones, the kind that will make a grown man cry. You drop to the floor, experiencing pain like you've never had in your life. That's a kidney stone attack. They're razor-sharp mineral crystals which cut everything that they touch, and they're very painful. Science today has shown what the major cause of kidney stones is. It's not because your mother had them or your grandfather had them. You get kidney stones not genetically, but from the food you eat. Number one cause of kidney stones is meat. The amino acids in meat are very negative on the kidneys and will create kidney stones faster than anything else. So, if we see this tendency to kidney stones, we can tell the person about it. We might even check the other signs we have for kidney stress that we've learned in the course of these sessions. From the top, if we lift the upper eyelid, we'll sometimes see expanded vessels here. These may also have some dots on them, which may show a tendency to calcification in the sinus area. It's like a chronic clogged state, which gradually just calcifies. I know one man who had a lot of very serious health problems. He went totally into this food therapy, and after some months, actually it was after some weeks, I think, it was maybe 5 or 6 weeks, he caught a cold, which is not unusual when people change over. Sometimes the people get like cold symptoms because the body is throwing off a lot of mucus that may be gathered in the sinus area. And when I visited him, he showed me a stone that he had sneezed out of his nose, a calcified piece that came right out of his sinuses. And after it dried, it was still there. It was just a calcified piece of stone. Been carrying with him for many, many years. On his eyes, you could see this. This is showing like stone or calcification, kind of hardening. So, with this picture, we can now look at the eyes in a totally different way. We can look at all the little dots and spots and think this has some meaning. On the left eye or the right eye, a little bit different. This is the liver area because it's the right eye. If we think of the left eye, the one that's closest to the nose, this is more the pancreas. The pancreas goes in the middle next to the liver, and the tail goes off a little into the left side. So pancreas is actually a little more dominated by left side energy and shows up more there. So if you see this kind of blotchiness there, this is hardness in the pancreas. Very often you'll see it in both, because basically the same kind of foods will cause hardness in the liver and also in the pancreas. And you may see someone who has all four. They've got them on both sides. The interesting thing here is it's a little difficult to use the eyes for short-term diagnosis of recovery. For instance, if I see someone who's got these dots or these spots, and I say, watch out, you have a tendency to tumor formation. And this person understands this. He's intelligent, can understand what this is all about, decides to do something about it, and then asks me 3 months later, look at my eyes and see if those spots are still there. We don't really have to look because we know they're still there. These spots don't go away fast. But within 3 months, you can actually turn the edge on a tendency to tumor formation. So you can actually be getting yourself out of the danger zone, but the eyes will show that it's still there. It's like leaving a mark of what's been. They do become less and less with time, and the eyes in general get much clearer. This will clear up faster. This general yellowness will clear up faster than these blotches. So we use the spots on the eyes, especially for evaluating the situation at the moment when the person has not yet gone over to healthy living, good food. But once they've started, then we would rather use other means of checking their progress than these spots on the eyes, because it takes a long time. It can take a couple of years before you see a real difference in that. These things are very slow in developing, and they're very slow in receding. Now, one thing that's also interesting with eye diagnosis is that if this is now the right eye, we have a small membrane right here on the side. When the person looks left and right, this membrane normally is tight and stays there, stays in place. When people have strong yin in their bodies, this means expansion and looseness. And what you'll find happen often is that the membrane will actually move with the eye instead of staying tight in the corner. So you can ask the person to look left and right and see if the membrane stays tight or if it moves. Later on, we'll work in groups. You can start checking all these things out. That's all part of the fun of learning this kind of health evaluation. And you can then on each other check it out. Usually if the left side is loose, it's more serious than if the right side is loose. You can probably imagine why. Think again about our yin and yang and heaven's force and earth's force movements in the body that we've taken up before. The right side is dominated by earth's force, left side by heaven's force. So when the side which is yang, or dominated by heaven's force, is now getting too loose, it's a sign that things are really coming out of balance. Whereas this side, which is dominated by the more yin expanding force, when it gets loose, of course it's a sign of extreme yin, but it's less serious. And experience shows that, especially with diabetics, you'll see the tendency for the left eye membrane to expand more. Diabetes is a yin problem. So, I'll just shortly mention something to remind you. We've taken it up before, but a little repetition is certainly in order. When I'm looking at these eyes, that is that if there is a large space between the iris and the lid, this is a sign of yin san pa ku. We took it up before. San pa ku. And is also a sign of strong yin. This is but a conditional thing and can be changed, just like you can tighten up the membranes. It's a conditional thing. So, after we've talked about the eyes, let's take a couple minutes and discuss the ears. The ear, in general, is related to the kidneys, just as the eyes in general are related to the liver. They're general Chinese associations. So sometimes you see the ears are very red. The whole ear is red and much different than the rest of the head. So this we would immediately associate with some kind of stress in the kidneys. If the earlobes are well developed, this is a sign of mineral balance, strong constitution. We talked about this before. And if the ear tends upward with very little lobe, this is a sign more that there was a lot of protein in the food, less minerals, more protein at the time that this baby's ear was formed, or that the ear of this person before it was born. So if you think about an old TV hero, Mr. Spock, Star Trek, Spock has very interesting ears. They really go up. There's not much down here, but really they go up. Now, using our understanding of macrobiotic health evaluation, we would assume that on Mars there was not a lot of mineral-rich food. That the Martians were really heavy on the protein. That the ears would go like that. It's almost like a wolf, like the ears growing up instead of down. Wolves eat very protein-rich food. So when ears go up, that's a sign of weaker constitution in general. If it's minerals that are lacking, but not necessarily heavy on the protein, the ear may just be smaller. If we take high amounts of fruit, we actually can demineralize our bodies by overburdening the liver and the kidneys. And this may then form on the baby a smaller ear. So fruit is fine, but we just eat moderate portions. We don't become fruitarians or eat masses of fruit. It's high in simple sugar, and it's difficult to create a stable condition eating lots of fruit. So the ear, in general, is a good barometer for the basic constitution. Now, within the ear, we have three different areas. First of all is the outer ridge of the ear, which corresponds to our circulatory system. The last part of the ear, or the outer part of the ear, is the last part to develop, actually. It just keeps, it's like it forms as a real ear. First of all, it's just a small thing. It gradually forms into an ear. This is circulatory system. So if it is well formed, nice lap over and looks very harmonious, this would tend to speak for constitutional strength in the circulatory system. If the ridge of the ear is red, but the rest of the ear is not, then we're not looking at something that has to do with kidneys. Now we're talking more about circulatory stress. So when you look at each other's ears, if you see the redness, look and see, is the whole ear red, or is it only the ridge? This middle area corresponds to the nervous system. So you look, is it well developed? Or sometimes it's just very flat. It looks like there is the lap over here, but then it just almost goes flat into the hole. If this is well developed, that's a sign of a strong nervous system. So optimally, we've got a good ridge, harmonious here, then also the middle part is strong, and then the very last part here, going into the canal, is corresponding to one we have left is the digestive system. If we think about the previous sessions talking about our basic systems, digestive system, nervous system, circulatory system. So it's interesting sometimes to look in the ears of people who have cancer of the digestive tract. Stomach cancer, which is not so common, it happens, but much more common is intestinal cancer, one of the biggest causes of cancer death in Western society. And you'll sometimes see a little greenish color right here all around the entrance to this canal. The greenish gray color is the cancer color. Wherever it comes, it's not good. If we were to see this color when we look in the ear. The next logical thing to do would be to look in this area of the hand, because intestinal cancer often shows as a greenish discoloring of this area. So if we see both, then we can be a little more secure that we're really seeing something here. If there are a lot of things growing on, like wart kind of things and sticking out, this is usually a sign of fat excess. And if it's general on the ear, it's more kidneys, or it may just show that the circulatory system is holding too much fat. So again, we have a very useful tool. Now normally, these things go very fast. I'm taking time to explain all these things in detail, and that takes time, but when you actually look at each other, it goes very quick. Just give a quick glance and you see all these different things. And you see so much that you really have to sort things out. You have to sort out what's important from what's not important. But for your practice sessions here with the group work with each other, it's a lot of fun to look at all the details you can find, because you're trying to carry this theory over into the real world and see what you can see in each other. But sometimes these things may be very unimportant when we're talking about the general health of the person and what is important for this person to consider in the way of life changes, lifestyle changes, food changes. So, eyes, ears, the whole body. We've seen today, we've had hands and feet, all these different things, and they all give us insight into our health condition. So sometimes we will see what we can call contradictory things. One thing will speak for a strong constitution, one thing will speak for a weak constitution. So we'll say this speaks for this person is more yin or more yin problems, but other things speak for yang problems. Let's remember that most people do have mixtures of both, and when we try to make an overall appraisal, we should just count them off. Like here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that speak for yin. We have 1, 2 things that speak for yang. So we would say this is more a more a yin problem. The yang is less predominant. So don't be confused by these contradictory things, because people are a mixture of all kinds of things. They may have a strong constitution, they may have weakened that strong constitution, they may have a weaker constitution, but they've actually strengthened their condition, so that it's all a little confusing. But as you look at more and more people, you'll start getting some clear patterns going. You'll see certain things that keep popping up. If you have the opportunity to travel internationally, it'll be interesting for you to see that in different countries there are different problems. Because I seem to commute a lot between Scandinavia and Germany, it's always interesting for me to compare what Germans look like as opposed to Scandinavians. I'll see more signs of liver problems among Germans, more signs of kidney problems among Scandinavians. But this is a very big generalization. There's lots of both in both places. But in general, you can see big, big differences. A few years ago, I used to lecture behind the Iron Curtain. It's like the James Bond of macrobiotics. I would go behind the Iron Curtain, do lectures which were illegal because they were not allowed by the Communist Party, which added a certain amount of adventure and fun to it. But it was always interesting for me to get aboard the airplane in Prague after going through 10 different controls to be sure I was not a Czech trying to leave the country, and then to get off the airplane in Scandinavia to have not only smiling faces now instead of frowns, but totally different patterns. The Czechs and the Poles actually eat more meat than affluent Western Europeans. And this really shows on their health condition. They looked very unhealthy. When I was doing counseling in Czechoslovakia, again and again I kept meeting people that had just this one line. Remember in a previous session we talked about hand diagnosis? That the line of the circulatory system and the headline of the nervous system, that these two sometimes in a yang form will become one. And this is a sign of constitutional weakness. You see them now and then, but it was very interesting how many of these I saw visiting Czechoslovakia. And as I pried more into their food habits, it was very obvious to me what was going on. And it was, in any case, very interesting. So as you go about your travels, if you do have the opportunity to travel internationally, you can keep these things in mind that we've been going through and see how do different countries look. You'll see definite differences because there are different food habits in different countries. There are certain racial characteristics, or we could say ethnic characteristics, but these are usually very grossly exaggerated. Okay, so let's go over to the practical side again. And now, with all these things we've been doing, we'll take a look at another participant. Okay, hand went right up there. So, take off the glasses. How old are you?
23.
23. So, let's get now a general view of body. What does the face look like? What are the things that stand out to you? Let's take a look at your hand. We'll have my hand as a comparison here. Okay. So I'll do the usual here. We'll check the shoulders. Okay, so there's not as much hardness here as we had before, but it's not really as soft as it should be. The vertebrae you actually can feel, but not as clearly as should be. So this is like something in between. He doesn't have the need to do so much discharging of these compacted fats as some of the people that we have looked at before, but it's still not the optimal. What kind of food do you eat?
Well, up to until 6 weeks ago, I was eating the traditional Norwegian diet.
Norwegian.
You probably know.
Yeah, I know the Norwegian diet. At least there's a lot of fish in that, right?
No sugar and no pork.
No sugar and no pork. Okay. Well, those are big steps. Now, when we take a look at his hands, first of all, they're very wet. So, as soon as we see wet hands, we would see, can we verify that on the face? Very easy, huh? Very easy. The kidneys. Kidneys under the eyes. What really stands out? What stands out, especially when you look at his face? Aside from the kidneys, especially what we see is the mouth. For me, the mouth area really stands out because it is much more yin. Now, when I look at him from the side, the lower lip protrudes far, relatively speaking, let's say a bit beyond the upper lip, showing that especially in the intestinal area, there is strong yin. His intestines are expanded. Now, If you remember from our session on the mouth, facial diagnosis, would you say this problem more lies in the small or large intestines? His problem actually is in the small intestine, because maybe you can't see it quite as well as I can. We'll turn to the side. But the swelling is actually coming out of the upper part of the lip and going more over. The swelling is actually coming out of here. When it's large intestine, it seems to be taking the skin with it right under the lip. This is actually coming right out of the, well, middle to upper part. Now also, if you look close, now for some of you this will be difficult with the distance, but I can help you with this. The upper lip also shows some expansion, not as much as the lower lip, but especially the middle part, the middle 40% of the upper lip shows expansion. This is stomach. So stomach energy is yin, and intestinal energy is yin. Now the intestines for us are like roots. A tree has roots in the ground and absorbs the nutrients out of the soil directly into the roots. So at that moment when these nutrients are absorbed into the roots, it becomes part of the tree. Plants are the opposite of animals, and in the more specific sense, human beings. Human beings and mammals take the food in through the mouth, and it's still not part of us. We can swallow it, and it's still not part of us. The food actually technically becomes part of us when it's absorbed in the small intestine into the blood. So, in other words, we can say that our intestines are our roots. So here, my suggestion would be that he get better rooted in life. And he does that in many ways, but when we talk about the biological aspect, we would say strengthen the intestinal area. Now, the fact that he has been staying away from sugar is a very smart thing, because that's the #1 cause of excess yin. However, there are other things which can weaken that. If you take honey as your alternative, it's basically the same yin force.
I quit coffee a week ago.
A week ago, great. Just in time for our sessions here. That's good. Because with the wet hands, coffee would be the worst thing. It would be creating a lot of excess yin energy, stress in the kidneys, and would just further the problem. So that's great. Now, what other things would we say here? Let's take a look at that area again between the eyebrows and the eyes. Remember we talked about that? For those of you who are sitting a little closer, the eyebrows to the eyes, this area, is puffy. It's swollen. This area here, it's sticking out. It's not tight. If he eats good macrobiotic food, and is especially careful with fruit, not too much fruit, or any like sweeteners and things that are strong yin, within 3-4 months, his face will have a different form. When the Iron Curtain was still around, I used to go to Berlin a lot, and there were always these controls, because you had to go about 120 miles through East Germany to get to West Berlin. It's sitting like an island in the middle of East Germany. So you have a control when you enter East Germany, and you have especially a control when you go out of East Germany into West Berlin. And if you ever traveled internationally, the border agents, the police, border police, they'll look at your picture and see if that's you. But the East German police, they would really... It was a long process. They were really, is this really him, or is it somebody trying to escape? There was always a lot of tension. It was a very young, tight situation. In any case, I know several people in West Berlin who began eating macrobiotically. And they routinely would drive through East Germany. And suddenly, after 2 or 3 months of macrobiotics, they got constantly hassled by the East German border guards. Constantly, because their faces no longer look like the passport picture. That's how much it goes. One of my friends who has a macrobiotic shop in West Berlin used to eat a lot of meat, a lot of sugar, and his face was very puffy. He went over to macrobiotics. His face got very trim, the mean, lean look of macrobiotics. And he told me that on his last trip out of West Berlin and into East Germany, they studied this a long time, and then they started asking him a lot of questions. They didn't think that was him. Then he explained to them that he had begun a health food fast, and that this had reduced the things. And then he said that the border guard then said, "You used to look better." Really. So it's all a matter of perspective. Anyway, back to our subject here. His facial structure will change a lot because the puffiness between the eyebrows and the eyelids will get tighter as his spleen condition gets more young. His intestinal condition will improve. The tightening of the lips will not be very apparent over the next 3 or 4 months, but within a year or 2 years, there can be a lot of change, especially if he eats a lot of these good root vegetables like burdocks. You know burdocks?
I don't know the Norwegian or Swedish name for it.
It's called burrot in Norwegian.
All right.
Mm-hmm. If you can get that one, it's very nice. And it's the best vegetable for strengthening intestinal problems or weakness. Another good one is the roots of dandelions.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something. We have a dish called kimpira. It's a Japanese word which is nothing more than a root vegetable long cook dish. It's using burdock roots and carrots, although you can use other root vegetables than burdock roots if you don't have them. But this kind of style would be perfect for you. A couple times a week, maybe even 3, 4, 5 times a week. That would be excellent. And there's actually, my wife has a recipe using burdock roots and onions. That would be very good for you. Or no, she's using it's dandelions and onions. And since our book is soon coming out in Swedish, you can read it. So, like neighbors. So we can then help out with some of these kind of recipes because those root vegetables will be good. Also using kuzu. You know kuzu? K-U-Z-U. Kuzu is the starch from a very powerful root vegetable, or a root, not a vegetable, the root of a plant. And it has a lot of yang force in it, and it also is very intestine strengthening. So using that in sauces, things like that, that will improve it. Physical exercise is always good for what they call hara strengthening this part, and that will be the most important parts. If we look on the side now, the constitution, what would you say about the ears here? Is this a strong constitution or weaker constitution? Weaker, yeah, they're a little smaller. The redness goes more along the outside edge here, showing more circulatory system. Let me look at your hands again. Now, this we could call a fairly good lifeline, but it forks too early. So the lifeline itself is good, but it's too short, meaning too short to be optimal. So this is not what we'd call a weak lifeline, but it's not as strong as it could be. So through conscious food, he can balance this out. But we see he has some disadvantages. That is that he's so young. he has grown up at a time when we have a lot of the luxuries of modern society, foods which before were treats for Christmas or for birthday party or weddings has become the daily food today, and this is what's causing people to get weaker. So, being 23 years old, when his mother was carrying him, there was already a lot of excess. Norway, before, like Sweden, was a very poor country, and the people had to work very hard. They had to eat very simple foods. Most Swedes and Norwegians 150 years ago only ate maybe 20 foods in their whole life. It's just very simple things they got. Very hard life. That's why so many came over here. So when I see the older generation Scandinavians, they have very strong constitutions, and this is very rapidly disappearing. So this constitution is more typical. I can see the traits of his strong ancestors. It's a little hard to explain that because with a little experience maybe you see that more. I can see where it's just been the wrong food choices by his mother and what he was given as a child, of course without any guilt or blaming, because these things are done without any knowledge of what's going on. No one really, except a few people, realize the effect that food has on the constitution. So he is now developing through the food he's been eating the last 6 weeks here, as well as already at home, staying away from sugar. He's already making the first steps away, and because he's still at a young age, his recuperative power is great, and he can balance that out. So, good possibilities for the future, and always thinking about the condition in general is too yin, and so just a clear picture of going in a more yang direction. One of the most common mistakes people make when they deal with these two forces of yin and yang is they will look at this and say, this is a yin condition, he should eat yang food. It's a very kind of simplistic way of approaching it. And what happens when people do that is they usually think that's a lot of fun for 2 or 3 days, you know, and then gradually it's not fun anymore, and it gets to be very one-sided and very unsatisfying, and then people may just throw the whole thing and say, I'm tired of all this yin-yang stuff. You know, I just want to enjoy food again. So the best thing to realize is that everybody needs a good broad approach. If you eat just a general basic macrobiotic fare, you will be taking in the foods that you need, because we're cutting out the sugar and the tropical fruits and tomatoes, these things that are very strong yin. We're cutting out the strong yang things like eggs, cheese, so that we're staying more in this nice balance in general. So in the long run, it goes good. But if you know more of the specifics, you can accelerate the process. But in any case, whether you have a yin or yang condition, everybody should take from a wide scale. Everybody needs good quality yin. Everybody needs good quality yang. That means grains, vegetables, and sauerkraut, all these things. Sauerkraut, of course, yin. So even though his condition is yin, sauerkraut can contribute to strengthen him because he also needs some yin, and the lactic acid fermentation in these vegetables helps to rebuild the intestinal quality. Any other comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So it's always so interesting to look at people, especially with our perspective, and to get a little insight into how they can become more balanced. So it goes very quickly, but already you can see that another session is coming to an end here. So we'll break for now and continue later. So what I'd like to do now is have you work in groups. Now, a good-sized group is maybe 5 people. That gives you 4 people to look at. And it can be 1 more or less. It doesn't have to be 5, but you can form with the people around you, form a group, and you can start looking at all the things we've talked about. I've seen many people have been taking notes, and so you've got the information down. If you've forgotten some things, just check back through your notes as you're looking. And what I will do is go around and quickly give my input into the different groups, and any questions you have as we go around. The advantage of a group like this is that we have many people to look at. So also tomorrow we'll do some more group work, and we'll have different groups, so you can keep looking at people, because the number of people you can really check out closely will be somewhat limited. You can look at a lot of faces, but checking out the hands and the shoulders, that's a limited number. So we want to take advantage of the fact that so many people are here now to learn this, and that everybody has the same interest to learn as much as possible in this time. So we'll form in different groups, and if you yourselves have gone through most of what you think is now manageable, then you can also just form new groups and just keep moving, just flexibly as you would like to do it, so that you can use this time as efficiently as possible. And I even think I might do this, that we could run 2 hours now of just going through this, looking at each other, because we've had a lot of theories so far, and we need to balance that with some practice, and that will also keep us on schedule. Let's do it like this, that when you look at the people, you first think about constitution and general impressions. One of the techniques we use sometimes in group work is that the four people who are looking at the other object at the moment will look at the person, close their eyes, and try to imagine what kind of subjective impression do you have for this person. Like, do you feel vibrant strength? Do you feel chronic fatigue? What kind of energy is coming from this person? These are always very interesting things beside all of the details that we work with. And it's almost like taking a photograph of them. We look at them, we close our eyes, and we retain that subjective impression. Then we open our eyes again, check them out again. Maybe we'll do this a few times, 2, 3, 4 times, and then discuss among yourselves, what kind of impression do you get? For instance, if the person seems to have a tired look, they may say, well, I don't feel tired, but that's the impression that comes over, is that they're tired. Then we would think about the kind of strengthening foods, because if that's the energy that's coming over to other people, it may well be that there's some fatigue there behind it. So look at this as a general impression first, and check out the constitution. What things speak for strength, what things speak for weakness in the constitution, and what things are more yang and more yin in the constitution. Then after you've worked on constitution, then go on to condition. Check out the condition by using facial diagnosis, hands, shoulders, back, the ankles and feet, Achilles tendon. Remember the one thing we also had in a previous session where we looked at the skin here. When people have been eating a lot of saturated fat and animal food, they'll most likely have a very compact layer here, so you can feel that. You can feel it. You can't really easily pull the skin away. We've had a couple examples where you remember what that was like. So check out that. Those are general things. You see, is there like a lot of heavy fat, or is it more the need of building up? As we could see with in the previous session, the young man from Norway, that we could see here was a need to really build up. There was a weakened intestinal state, needs build up. Needs also strengthening kind of things, like those root vegetables we were talking about. So you can think about the advice you would give them, because hopefully we're using this so that we can take it one step further and give concrete advice, and this doesn't just remain as a let's say, a theoretical exercise, but rather something we really try to use for improving our life quality. Then you can go around each person in the group, and when you finish the group, then maybe form new groups. Find out other people who are finished and maybe reorganize. Keep looking at people, and that should keep you going for quite some time. I, in the meantime, will be just circulating around to different groups, and you can ask me questions, things that you haven't had a chance to address up to now. So you may want to shuffle the chairs around so that you're sitting in a group where you're looking at each other. It's easy, like have a circle of chairs, just as long as we can then put the chairs back in the rows they were before, kind of remember where those chairs were. And let's take off and do it.